when sorry is not enough. Enough said. Call Ed. EdBernstein.com.
It's the Ed Bernstein Show, Home Edition. Now, here's your host, Ed Bernstein.
Hey, we're back with Congressman Eric Swalwell, and it's great to see you again. I see you have some facial hair this time.
Yeah, the COVID beard. I'm in the group.
In the group. You're part of the crowd now. Hey, you just had written this incredible book called Endgame, Inside the Impeachment of Donald Trump. And before we talk about the book, because you start the book talking about your father, and I think in so many ways it defines who you are. Your dad was a policeman.
Yep.
Ultimately became a chief of police in Iowa.
That's right.
And then he had some problems there, right? Well, can you talk about it?
Yeah. So my earliest memory was as a 5-year-old, and my mom and dad in Iowa, right before I was about to go to bed one night, fretting over my dad possibly being fired. And then that continued for a number of weeks. And as a kid, honestly, I remember hearing the word fire and thinking like he was going to be put in a fire or something. That's why it stuck out to me. But I later learned that my father had come in as kind of a reform police chief to clean up a corrupt small town. And all of a sudden, within a couple years, they saw the DUI arrests go way up, not because they had developed a drinking problem, but because he actually enforced the law. He had cracked down on some burglary rings in town that turned out to be the children of some prominent people in town, and they wanted the cases to go away. And then it all reached a head when the county fair came. And so this is what makes it a very Iowa story. You have the county fair, and my dad gets a call from the fire chief that some of the mayor's friends are parked in the fire lane at the county fair. And the chief says they're refusing to leave or move. They say they can park wherever they want. What do you want me to do? And my dad said, well, it's not safe. If they don't leave, ticket and tow them. And so at the next council meeting, the mayor told my dad if he does not reverse those tickets, he's going to be fired. And this went on for a couple weeks, and my dad held firm. He didn't believe anyone was above the law, and he was fired. And he lost his job. We packed up our little family and went out west. And for me, it was the earliest lesson in life, and probably the best lesson, which is we all have to follow the same rules. And so there I found myself, about 33 years later, as a member of Congress, applying the same principle on the House Intelligence and Judiciary Committees, that whether you're the mayor of a small town or the president of the United States, no one's above the law.
There's a secondary message in that as well. And the secondary message is the amount of courage that your father demonstrated in risking his job, his livelihood for his family to stand up for what he believed to be right.
He doesn't like talking about it either. He's ashamed of it and embarrassed of it. That's how proud he is. And I still have to tell him, Dad, you did the right thing. And I went back and found for the book a bunch of Des Moines Register stories where they had covered this corruption in his town. And every story showed my dad to be a person of honor and the mayor and his friends to be corrupted. And so, he's still embarrassed about it. But I tell him that, he may no longer be a police officer. His dream job came to a crushing end, but, his son learned that lesson, and I've been able to apply it every day in public service.
And even before you became a congressman, you exemplified some of that courage. You took on a 40-year Congressman Peter Stark was in office for 40 years, had all the money in the world to run a re-election campaign, had all the support of 40 years of being in office. I mean, that takes courage. You weren't expected to win.
I was not expected to win, and it went from feeling impossible and improbable, and only when I won did it ever feel inevitable. But I really believe that, generationally, there were issues around gun violence and student loan debt and climate that really needed to be addressed. And so I was 30 at the time when I announced. He was 80. It still is the greatest age difference between two candidates to run for Congress. But it was really a call for generational change. And it was quite a mountain to climb. It was never easy. And Ed, again, some people say, oh, it was, I knew I was going to win, or it was so obvious. For me, it was just following what I thought was the right thing. I had a lot of people helping me, knocking on doors with me. It was exciting. It was an exhilarating run.
You mentioned guns, and when you were a presidential candidate, and we'll talk about that in a minute, you did emphasize a lot about guns. And once again, I mean, it's kind of an enigma. You grew up, your dad was a policeman. You grew up in a law and order household. I'm sure your dad was, I assume he was an advocate for firearms. He's a Republican, right? And then here you are, running for the Democratic nomination for president. Totally, different perspective, because on one hand, you have this balance. You seem to have this balance of a background and experience of growing up around a father who was law and order in favor of guns, and then here you are, an advocate for hey, let's look at where we are in 2020 and maybe make some changes.
Yeah, Ed, and my dad, he's an NRA member. I found out I was on the cover of the NRA's magazine a couple years back because my dad sent me a text message with the picture. So he would take me hunting as a kid. He still shoots. He has a concealed weapons permit as a former police officer. And I have two brothers who are police officers and gun owners. And I don't want to support anything or legislate in any way that would stop someone from protecting themselves, from hunting with their kids, or shooting for sport. I just believe that the most dangerous people should not have access to the most dangerous weapons. And I've had an opportunity in your great city, to learn and meet with, family members who've been affected by gun violence and very sensitive to what happened on October 1 and the changes that people hope to see and have already seen since they elected, a Democratic legislature, in Nevada to pass background checks and start to make some of the changes that are needed.
Yeah. I mean, you're right in line with what we're doing here in Nevada, for sure. All right. So then you became a congressman, and you chose two really difficult committees to get involved with, the Judiciary and the Intelligence Committee. What was so appealing about those two committees?
I came into public service after September 11. And so I was an intern on Capitol Hill, not really knowing if I was a Republican or a Democrat when September 11 happened. But I did see the country come together. I remember watching Republicans and Democrats stand on the Capitol steps and singing God Bless America the evening of September 11, on our television set, and just believing that, our country in the most trying times, we come together. And we did come together in the months and years after September 11. And I wanted to do my part to, go into public service. So I left a soccer scholarship with an injury to focus more on doing that. And so going on the Intelligence Committee, knowing that it played such a big role in the post-September 11 years, I felt like that's where I wanted to go and serve. The Judiciary Committee I talk about in the book, I've chaired a committee called Steering and Policy. It's the committee of committees. We give the committee assignments out to our colleagues. And in 2017, right before Donald Trump's to become president, I remember there was a small meeting with Speaker Pelosi, myself, Rosa DeLauro, the co-chair of the committee, and others. And we have a couple more spots to fill on the Judiciary Committee. And Speaker Pelosi recognized that really it was only freshmen left at that point who were requesting it. And we both looked at each other and had the same idea. And I said, Speaker, I think I should go on this committee. I had been holding out to go on. I'd always thought I'd go on the Energy and Commerce Committee. It seems to, make sense for a district that has a lot of innovation. But I just felt that the dark storm that was coming with the Trump administration, that we would need another prosecutor on that committee to bring just the experience that was going to be needed to conduct oversight of the administration. And I'll never forget her grabbing my arm and saying, do it. And so, because I had the seniority at that point, I was able to get one of the spots and never look back.
And how important that committee then became. I mean, nobody could have predicted that.
And, at the Judiciary Committee, we just had a hearing this week to pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. And as we left the committee hearing room, I remember talking to Madeline Dean, my colleague from Pennsylvania. She's a freshman. And I told her, I said, Madeline, not every Congress is like, this Congress. We have passed on this committee the For the People Act, which is voting rights and election reform, the background check bill, the DREAM Act, and the Equality Act that ends discrimination. Also, we impeached the president, and now we're going to pass sweeping police reform. And so it's been an exciting committee to be a part of.
It's a great thing. We'll just have to get the Senate now to
That's right. Exactly.
Job, right?
Exactly.
As part of those committees, you met and questioned a lot of very prominent figures. And I just wanted to ask you some opinions of some of them. Your opinion of some of them. Well, let's start with Roger Stone. Roger Stone, look, I see him on television. He looks like a character. How would you describe his personality?
He was very scared when he came into our committee room. I don't mean like frightened. I mean, he was nervous. And I had expected this because I've interviewed as a prosecutor, a number of witnesses and defendants. And I know that, people can talk a big talk, but when you sit down and there's no cameras around, most people recognize how serious it is.
Especially when you raise that hand.
Yeah, that's right. You do the same, right? That's your profession. When you raise the hand to swear to tell the truth. So I was the lead interviewer for Roger Stone, and the approach I wanted to take, knowing that he had been tweeting at me, that he had threatened to punch me in the face, that he had gone on radio shows, giving me a number of different nicknames. I thought the best thing I could do was to try and disarm him, because the goal, when you in a deposition or as a prosecutor with a witness, you just want the witness to talk. The more they talk, the more you learn. And we thought we could either learn a lot or, he would lie to us. And the fact that he would lie would be a consciousness of guilt. So the first thing I did, and I laid this out in the book, is I congratulated him. And he kind of sat back. And I said, well, Donald Trump, you've wanted him to run for president for decades. You've known him for decades. You played a pivotal role in the campaign. He's now President Trump. He's your friend. Congratulations. And he didn't really know what to make of it, because I think he thought I was going to go in there guns blazing, just the way he'd been going at me. And so it was really, I most questions, I was able to get him to talk. And, although he lied to us, again, the goal was to just have him talk and not clam up or be confrontational. The opposite of that was, of course, when we interviewed Corey Lewandowski a couple years later, for the public to see, when he was essentially just pounding his fist on the table, insulting the members, screaming like that. That is a failure, right? If that's what the witness has resorted to, that doesn't yield any information, and the public loses, faith in why we need to have these hearings. So with Roger Stone, he lied to us. We had him on the record, and that interview was used in the criminal counts that were brought against him.
Once again, for me, it becomes another example of your courage. I mean, it's not hard when you have these prominent. It is hard when you have these prominent people threatening you and talking about you, and who knows when these threats can or will be carried out. Another example of the courage that I've noticed that you have is the way you appear on Fox News. I mean, it's very difficult to get Democrats, to get elected officials onto Fox. Most of them won't go on Fox. You seem to be a regular on Fox. Why do you choose that path?
It's the only way my parents will see me on TV. I am also able to speak directly to the president. But I believe, and I think you probably agree as a trial lawyer, that you are at your best when you are going up against people who challenge you the most. And when I was a prosecutor, I would prefer to go up against, the most aggressive defense attorney than like someone who was trying their first case. I wanted to be challenged and tested. And I felt like Fox News, it forces me to defend what I believe in because they're going to come at you. In the book, I talk about, Tucker Carlson. I had gone on his show a number of times. And on one segment, he said to me during the midst of the Russia investigation, he said, Congressman, I can just hear him right now saying it, Congressman, if you have one piece of evidence of collusion, I'll give you a full half hour to come on and talk about it. Well, to me, that was a challenge. And so I put together a slide deck in about 24 hours. I tweeted it back at him and said, okay, I'm ready to, I gave you evidence. Evidence, by the way, is not a conclusion. It has to be tested, but I gave you a lot of evidence of collusion. And it was just crickets. They never got back to us. And then a couple of months passed, and then they start trying to rebook me on other issues of the day. And I held firm. And I remember my staff saying, you just need to give up on this 30 minutes because they just want to move on. They want to have you on other segments. And I said, well, if I went on for another segment that was just a 5-minute segment, that would be an acknowledgement by me that I didn't have evidence of collusion. And I didn't want to send that message. So finally, as I tell it in the book, about 6 to 9 months later, Tucker Carlson's executive producer reached out to me personally, found my personal email, and said, look, I don't know what has broken down with us, but we would like to have you back on the show. And I laid out for him what they had claimed, the evidence I had, and they owed me a half hour. And so he wrote back and said, okay, let's do it. And so I went on and, got a half hour with Tucker. And again, that's how passionate I felt about the evidence that we had. And I was, 5 minutes, 30 minutes, I'm not afraid to go on, but I just want them to uphold their end of the bargain if I'm expected to uphold mine.
Good for you. But can you talk about what is the difference between collusion and obstruction of justice? And why did we get a vote in favor of one and not the other?
So no Congress ever imagined that a candidate for the presidency would work in a way that the president did with the Russians. So we didn't write any laws in the past about having to report to law enforcement if you're approached by an agent of a foreign power, or not inviting that help yourself, as the president said with Russia, if you're listening, and then they were listening and they went to attack Hillary Clinton. So the Mueller investigation did not believe that there were any laws that were violated, but they did lay out the welcoming and expectation that Russia would help, which to me, I think is a signal that we need to make sure we write laws so that no future candidate can do this. But the Mueller investigation also did not, one, interview the president, which I really believe they should have sought to do, and two, they didn't look at his finances. So they saw that as a red line, I believe, because the president arbitrarily just said that was a red line to him. And so they never looked at that. And I accept, because we have to in our country, I accept that they didn't find a prosecutable crime on collusion. On obstruction of justice, that's essentially burying the evidence or lying about the evidence as investigators are trying to find out what you did. And with this president, he was caught essentially holding a shovel and had dirt on his boots. I mean, he told others to lie. He told Don McGahn to lie, refused to cooperate with Congress, encouraged others not to cooperate with Congress, dangled pardons in front of individuals, hoping that they would lie for him. So, Mueller found 10 obstructable incidents, which he will still be on the line for if he's not reelected. And I think that's why you're seeing him so desperate to win reelection. I don't think he cares about doing what's right for the country. He cares about himself, and he wants to stay in power but he also doesn't want to be prosecuted.
Do you anticipate he will be prosecuted when his term ends?
I hope the decision is made with the independence that he doesn't show others in their prosecutions. I again, as a former prosecutor, I don't want it to be a political decision. I want it to be based just on the evidence. And I think when you look at the evidence, he certainly will be investigated for the obstruction of justice. He'll be investigated for the invitation and the bribery scheme that he ran with President Zelensky in Ukraine. John Bolton has given us new evidence about inviting the Chinese to try and help him win an election. And of course, Ed, he's still and remains individual one.
After you guys voted on the Mueller report and he was vindicated, I guess, for the collusion, that next day you had the call with the Ukraine with trading missiles for dirt on Biden. Were you surprised? I mean, did it happen that quickly the next day?
No. With this president, I think it just fits the pattern of practice, that he has. Is a corrupt leader, and remember on that call transcript, he brought up Mueller. He was flaunting the fact that he thought Mueller had a poor performance, and so I think he was emboldened. And again, this was a long-running scheme. Before that call, Rudy Giuliani had already been going over there and trying to work with them to pressure them to find and manufacture dirt on Joe Biden.
And of course, you mentioned Bolton. This is a man who you tried to get to testify before your committee. He refused. I guess you could have gone to court and subpoenaed or attempted to subpoena him, but you felt it was going to take too long and to do that, and you wouldn't have the time during this presidential term to get testimony. And is that what you thought?
Yeah, and I think the best evidence of that is that we are still in court, not even at the Supreme Court level yet, on getting Don McGahn to testify, right? So if we had treated John Bolton the way we treated Don McGahn, we would not be in an impeachment inquiry right now. We'd be waiting for the Supreme Court to rule on that. And we felt the urgency of an upcoming election, and we weren't going to wait for a court to decide when we had enough evidence around an election that the president was trying to rig. And we did subpoena him. He said he was going to go to court, so we withdrew the subpoena. And then once he raised his hand and telegraphed that he had information at the Senate trial, Chairman Schiff invited him to submit an affidavit. And again, he refused to do so. So he's had multiple opportunities. He calls his book The Room Where It Happened. But I was in the room where it happened. The room where it happened is where people like Marie Yovanovitch, Fiona Hill, and Lieutenant Colonel Vindman came in, give sworn testimony, risked their livelihood, and courageously did what was right to hold the president accountable.
You questioned and spoke about during those time period to a lot of people. Let's talk about some of the positive people that you met and spoke with. But I wanted to also ask you, because you talk in the book about an encounter you had with Joe Biden during the debate. Once again, I thought you exhibited great courage. I mean, Biden was the front runner, former vice president of the United States. He's been around for a long time, a very important man. And you kind of called him to task on age, the difference between the old school and the new school. And how did he react to that afterwards?
He on a break, he came over to me and he asked me, first and foremost, how my daughter Cricket was doing, because she had recently been in the ICU with a respiratory issue. And he said something to the effect of, I hear you, wise ass, like something to that effect. He's such a kind man. He's a genial man. He's a listener, and he was the first person to call me when I dropped out of the race. And he said, as to pass the torch, which was the case I was making in the debate, he said, I hear you. And I want you to know, if I'm the nominee, I will do everything I can to enable young leaders to step up. And I know he meant it, because he's never broken any promise he's made to me when I worked with him as vice president. And one other classic Biden story, if you'll indulge me. when I was a freshman member of Congress in my first year, if you recall, the Affordable Care Act was just being launched. And there were issues with the website. So many people were trying to get on. It was crashing the website. And so I had dinner with Vice President Biden, and I had scheduled about 2 hours for the dinner. And then I had a telephone town hall with my constituents. And it was me and a couple other members with the vice president. And about 2 hours in, he was still talking about the Affordable Care Act and laying out what they were doing. And we hadn't yet been able to really ask him questions. And so I said, Mr. Vice President, I really hate to duck out on a dinner with the vice president, but I've got a town hall with 5,000 constituents who are dialing in. They're going to ask me about the Affordable Care Act. What do you think I should tell them? And he pulled out of his jacket pocket a note card, and he said, well, you can give them my notes and my thoughts on this. And he hands it to me, and I saw the aide behind him sit up and lean forward, like, no, like, we don't do that. And so I took those notes, I went and did the call, and I told them that this comes, directly from the vice president. Here's what they're going to do to fix it. And funny enough, when I got to the office the next morning, my staff had received a number of calls from the vice president's staff saying, like, we need those notes back. He didn't have supposed to give out his notes.
Well, it just shows.
Thank you. Yeah.
It's a great read. We're just about out of time. So if our viewers want to find out what the Endgame is, they're going to have to get the book. It's an insider view. It's a wonderful read. And thank you so much, Congressman Swalwell, for exhibiting and having the courage that you learned from your father. And we'll see you. Next week.
Thanks, Ed.
Hey, my friend George Chanos, who served formerly as Nevada's Attorney General, has written a tremendous book. It's entitled Millennial Samurai, A Mindset for the 21st Century. I've read it, and I believe it's an important book that can really help people in today's world. Now, George's goal is to empower other people, and it offers ways on how to deal with the challenges that we're facing here in our country and in our world today. And guess what? He's giving away free downloads. That's right. I said free. He's already had several thousand people download this book. And this is a free offer especially to viewers of our show. Now, George has been a guest a couple times, and I highly encourage you to download this book. Look, can't go wrong. It's free, and I'm sure you're going to pick up a few tips on how to cope with what's going on with the virus, how to cope with other people, as well as how to cope with other calamities that are going on in the world. Help you with relationships too. So, George Chanos, thank you so much for offering this to our viewers. The website's on our screen. Download it. Enjoy it.